does anybody want to comment on how the successive waves of immigration have gone from the Philippines to here?
Well, I think part of the thing is like it's been reflected, or
Yeah, go ahead. Haven't seen it. I mean, the changes, you know, how the community has changed because of the different waves of migrants.
Our first people in the Yakima Valley were students, a group of maybe 12 students who came in 1918. They had their dreams thwarted, and they found out that, number one, that they couldn't stay in school and they had to work. So they didn't complete high school even. They just worked, and they became farm workers. There was a migrant trail that went along there from Alaska all the way down to California. My father, and this is interesting, my daughter and I went to the National Filipino Historical Conference 2 years ago, and through Ancestry.net, we found out that my father crossed the Pacific Ocean 3 times. 3 times. And he was in bunkhouse 6 of the Great Hawaiian Sugarcane Company in 1932. And so, you know, there's some of that history. And we found out about some of the ships that he was on also. That was the Manong generation. And because of the Catholic influence, not very many women came over in those early years of the 1900s. And so those Filipinos who started coming here in 1918 to about 1936, it was lonely. And I think that if somebody wants to do a study, do it on the anti-miscegenation laws, because every state had them. You know, our first president of our Filipino community had to marry in Klickitat County, Washington. That's Goldendale, because there was an anti-miscegenation law in Yakima County. So they had those anti-miscegenation laws in Alaska, in California, in Washington State, all over the United States. And so, but Filipinos are one. If the Filipinos are one thing, they love to party. And it's like this film shows. They dress nicely, and who knows whose suit it was. And they did have 10-cent per dance halls in Washington State. And the other thing that Filipino men like to do is make love, you know? And so, and there was interracial marriage. There was no anti-miscegenation law that could stop love. And so I have aunties who are African American. I have aunties who are Puerto Rican. I have aunties who are Mexican. I have, you know, American Indian. And I tell you, when we started marrying the Indians in the Yakima Valley, boy, the land that we could lease, that acreage went up. Right, Richard? I mean, our second community president in the Yakima Valley was a man named Johnny Manzano, and he married a Yakima Indian woman. And the leasing of Indian trust land to Filipino farmers increased with that marriage, as the second president, our second president did. But the Second World War made a difference, because what happened then was that those Filipinos who, you know, proved themselves as loyal to the United States and who volunteered for the Filipino infantry battalions, they went back to the Philippines and won back the Philippines, you know, with the United States. And that allowed what? That allowed those Filipino men to marry and bring back Filipino wives. That's probably the second big thing that happened in terms of our dating habits. You know, 1965, and so the golden era, as far as I'm concerned, were the 1950s, because Filipinos were more accepted. There was still intermarriage going on, but those Filipino infantry people were able to bring their Filipino wives here. And then I'd say the next one was 1965, when there became more stringent immigration laws. But
That's when they opened it up to Filipino professionals.
yeah, that's when the professionals came over. But also the brain drain started then because of the Marcos dictatorship, and that's when you look at the Tri-Cities area of Washington State, and there are so many Filipino engineers and Filipino doctors and professionals that escaped the Marcos regime. That's what the Tri-Cities is all about. And other cities here in the Washington State. That's probably the fourth wave. And then since then, it's been a combination of relatives of the people who are here already, and then new immigrants who come. And let me tell you, the immigration laws are the worst for the Philippines and Mexico. The U.S. immigration laws treat the Philippines and Mexico the worst.
I just want to make one point, though. You know, when we see the first wave in the early 1900s, this was not an accident that these men came here, and it was not an accident that they were mostly men, because women were discouraged from coming because Filipinos were brought. First of all, you know, what was the first thing that the United States did when it took over the Philippines? It sent a ship of what? Soldiers? No, teachers. The Thomasites went to the Philippines, the teachers, to set up the school system, to indoctrinate Filipinos, to brainwash Filipinos into believing whatever they wanted them to know. And what did they want them to know? They wanted to know they should come here, they would be the land of opportunity. Why? Because they needed cheap labor. And why did they want Filipinos? Because they were U.S. nationals. There was no immigration issue. You got on a boat, you got off the boat, you got to work. That's it. So they brought us here on purpose. And they did not want women to come. Because why did they need women for? They wanted the men to be cheap labor, to work in the fields and the canneries. They don't want them to be distracted by having families. You know, it was like slavery. You know, they brought us here on purpose, but in this case, we got on the boat ourselves.
Right? It's true.
The third Asian wave. I mean, the Chinese immigration stopped in the 1890s. Then Japanese, with the 1906 treaty, stopped the Japanese immigration. And so that's when the need for Filipino labor in Hawaii. Hawaii was the first place for Filipino immigration, and then they came up north, and then the Alaskan cannery trade. That was a big draw there also, and then of course agriculture.
You know, I hate to